I was 28 years old and I had just been released from prison after 5 years. Eventually, I was loaded into a bus with 2 other men. Fear, excitement, uncertainty, and relief washed over me. In my excitement, I struck up a conversation with a man called Alan. We chit-chatted back and forth about how he was a carpenter and tradesman, and that I was going to college. We spoke about various things: freedom, our first meal, and parole conditions. I couldn't do shit while on parole, because I was considered a high risk, but he had some parole conditions I found odd. One that stuck out to me was not to wear masks or enter the city of Berkeley without the expressed permission of the city chief of police. I laughed at it and figured he had robbed someone. Because, when you lived around pimps, murderers, rapists, and thieves for about 5 years, that's what you do. We arrived at the parole offices and parted ways. I began a long stream of reintegrating back into society. About 3 months go by and I run into Alan at the parole office. We talk for a second, and I loan him some money, expecting not to get it back. By this time, I was in college and had more money than I knew what to do with, and had my own place. I vaguely told him where I was staying, and he said he'd check it out because he was trying to get out of the halfway house. Again, we parted ways. Now here's where it gets weird. I'm in my apartment playing my Xbox 360, when suddenly I hear a commanding knock on the door. Expecting it to be my parole officer, I immediately jump up and open it. It's Alan, with this lady he introduces to me as his girlfriend. Let's call her Jane. Immediately I ask, "How did you know where I lived?" "Oh, I saw your car parked by the side of the street." Which I just said okay, and let them in. Mind you, I live in an apartment complex, with about 50 other people, so even if he had seen my car, there's no way he would know exactly where I lived. We started talking, and he tells me he needs money, and I'm like, "Hey, help me anchor this TV stand and I'll give you another $20. Call it even on that other 20, and I'll order the pizza." Alan and his girlfriend said sure, and we hung out for a couple of hours. At one point, I felt a little odd about how he knew where I lived, but brushed it aside because any human contact was needed in my current state of lockdown. After the pizza, I felt some sort of tension, like my sixth sense was alerting me. I chalked it up to hanging out with another parolee, and didn't want to get busted by my parole officer. So he and his girlfriend left, and I didn't see them again until nearly a year later. I won't go into detail, but I violated my parole and went back to prison. I was keeping myself occupied by reading papers. I picked up the Detroit Free Press, and the cover story reads, "What's wrong with the Michigan Department of Corrections? Day 3. I read it wondering what type of garbage they have in this article, because I know my intentions are to make a productive citizen out of myself. What I find floors me. Alan is in the article, and his girlfriend, for befriending and murdering an 80-year-old lady, and suspected of more crimes throughout the Detroit metro area. As if that isn't messed up enough, the premise of their motive was to do handiwork for the old lady. I had these 2 people in my house under the same stipulations. Thinking back about how they got my address and just showed up at my place, I have no idea what their intentions were. But one thing I can tell you, I would have never saw it coming. I'm a 6'2", 280-pound 11 Bravo Iraq War veteran that spent 5 years lifting weights in prison. I'm a big-ass dude. Maybe that's why they didn't try anything. Or maybe because I bought them pizza. Who knows? I tuck my kids into bed every night, and occasionally I lie to them when they ask about monsters. I tell them that they're not real. But I know the truth. I fed 2 of them pizza one night in my apartment. On a lighter note, if anybody is wondering, I've been off parole 3 years, just started my own business, married with 3 kids. Freedom fucking rocks. This story takes place about 5 years ago in North Bend, Oregon, also part of Coos Bay, but Coos Bay's the other end of it. This is actually my own story. It's not written down, so it's going to sound a little different. Probably, hopefully, a little more like I actually talk. This is going to be the story about how one of my wife's coworkers disappeared and still is not found, as well as a different murder, or what they say was an accidental death, leading up to it, and a little bit about the craziness of the apartments I lived in and some of the shenanigans my neighbors would pull. My wife and I actually met on Facebook through my sister. After a few months of chatting back and forth, we decided to actually meet up. I was actually divorced probably 6 months or a year before that. She was in an abusive relationship, so we figured we'd just go try to start things somewhere else. I went and picked her up in California, and we decided to move to Coos Bay, North Bend, Oregon. 2 different cities, tiny as hell, thrown together. I never know which one's which. I think technically we were in North Bend, but I'm not sure. At the time, my mom was living there. That was the whole reason we moved up there, so I could actually see my family again. So we ended up getting an apartment. I think I paid 2 months rent in advance. I'll try to find a picture of the apartment and put it on the screen now so you can see it. This apartment wasn't very nice. We'll just say that. I guess it was more considered the bad area of town, but we really didn't know. Like literally that one little area. The cops were there all the time. It was ridiculous. So we move in and we're on the 3rd floor. The neighbors next to us have a family and they're all actually pretty cool. And the other one next to us is open. We're kind of in between 2 of them. Paper thin walls. It looks like they took old like college dorms, because it is right across from the college, and split them up to really small. We were in a studio apartment, probably a couple 100 square feet. Like it was tiny, ridiculous tiny. And after the family moved out next to us, we ended up getting some tweakers that moved in there. And then on the other side, we got another old guy that was a tweaker. So then they start sleeping together in exchange for drugs or something. And I get woken up with them stabbing each other all the time. It happened a lot. I'd always be out on my porch having to call the cops because one neighbor stabbed another one. Something over drugs all the time. Or the fights outside. Amazing how I got drug into that. Long story short, they both got evicted. Another neighbor moves in. This guy did no drugs, but he seemed a little off. He'd stop me outside, and he'd yell at me for wearing skulls all the time, because all my clothes are pretty dark. They have skulls and everything. I didn't quite understand. I was just like, whatever, dude, and just kind of walked away. And then the cops start showing up at my house all the time. So the cops come up and they're, hey, we got a noise complaint. I was like, well, I'm not doing anything. And then after a while, they'd stop, and there was one time I heard a ruckus out there, and I opened it up. Dude had called the cops again on me. And the cop didn't even knock on my door. He just starts yelling at him to leave me alone. Needless to say, we lived around some interesting people. My wife worked 2 buildings away. Where we were right next to the Staples parking lot. She worked at Walmart. So she'd have to walk through the Staples parking lot and then to Walmart. But I'd walk her anytime it was dark because this place was pretty freaking bad. I don't understand how a tiny little town like that could be so bad. But I guess drugs do a lot to people. So she's working there for a while, and she gets to know this other lady named Glinda. Glinda was a really sweet old lady. I remember meeting her a few times. She was the greeter at Walmart. Everything was fine for probably 6 months or so, besides the cops showing up at our apartment every day for someone within the complex. A little bit more time goes by, and then a young girl from a couple miles down the road disappears. This girl had a little bit of a mental handicap. And I guess what she'd do is she'd walk to Walmart every day, grab her drink, and then walk home. Like it was her daily routine, very strict. One day she just didn't come back from that routine. And she was missing, I want to say she was missing for about a week or 2. And then they finally found her behind the nightclub, in the bushes, off of a trail way up in a tiny little creek, face down in the water, and she had drowned. They said it was accidental. I don't know, the family and a lot of us are like, whoa, how does she... It just didn't add up for us. All the stipulations, I didn't see her crawling into the bushes, putting her face in a 1-inch. Like, it was hard to get there. They could barely get her out. So then, not long after that, or right around the same time, Glinda disappears too. The older lady, the greeter from Walmart. At the time, she was living with her son, who had some sort of mental issues as well. He was supposed to be on medication, but I don't think he'd take it. I guess they'd fight a lot, and this night after she got home, supposedly they got in an argument and she left, leaving her phone, her medication because she was diabetic too, and even her glasses, which she needed to see. And it's supposed that she went on a walk and never came back. So the police interview her son, and these are rumors that were floating around town, you know how that is. He had said that the aliens came and took her, and then said that they would find her body in the San Francisco Bay. As far as I know, he wasn't really questioned much more after that, but I can't be certain. Like I said, a lot of this was rumors, except for the fact that she disappeared and the son was the last one to see her alive. It's also stated that a few people could see him out by the grocery store, looking towards the woods and just laughing afterwards. In the couple of weeks following, there were search parties non-stop, from the beach all the way up the bay, and there was still no sign of her. Dogs, the whole community, everyone was out searching, but there was no trace to be found. After a while, they eventually did pronounce her dead and held a memorial service. And to this day, there's still no sign of her, and no one knows what happened. I think the craziest thing for me is to think that it was so close to home, literally and figuratively. It was literally not even a block from where I lived, and it was also so close to home as in it was a really good friend of my wife as well as my sister. They all knew each other and worked together. So it was really hard on them as well, and my wife still often checks in to try to see if there's been any update. I know it's kind of a stretch, but if any of you are in the Coos Bay, North Bend, Roseburg, any of that area, up around the Douglas County area, or even anywhere along the coast for all I know, if you may have seen this lady at any time, years ago or currently, please make sure to call the investigator's number on the screen. It'd be really nice to have some closure for the family and friends. So hopefully in some way maybe this can get more exposure and we can find out what happened to her. And I know this isn't necessarily a story, it's more of an experience, but I wanted to do it, so I did. I really don't know if it would have been her son, or if it was just a really bad area and she did go on a walk and someone found her, because that happened a lot out there. The crime was really bad in this small area. It had to be the meth. Like meth, I know people say meth is everywhere. Literally meth was everywhere in this city. Like people would smoke it while working at work. Like it was freaking bad. I don't understand it. I'm just hoping in the future there can be some closure, because I know my wife still thinks about her constantly, as well as my sister, and I'm sure her family and friends. I appreciate you all checking out this video, and if you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to yourmaker6260@gmail.com. There is also a news link in the description to more info on the first story, as well as a phone number to call if you happen to see any signs of Glinda, or recognize her from a while back. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. I picked up the Detroit Free Press. I picked up the Detroit Free Press. I read it.